everyone. Good afternoon. We are coming to you from Emoji Behavioral Health. Want to go ahead?
Sure. So we're really a presentation that everybody wants to grow their money as a counterpoint around programming and financial strategy. And as precarious as they can be in healthcare, we've managed to make it this far. So here we are today.
Yeah, indeed. Indeed.
So we'll go ahead and share our screen here. Let's see. So I think this is how you do it, right?
And those two clicks.
Okay, yeah.
We have to make sure to do all the clicks when we
Exactly.
start these presentations,
Right.
as you know.
All right. So everybody's able to see our presentation, I'm gathering, right?
Yes.
Okay. And oh, okay. That's not okay. Good. Thank you, Tasia. All right. So the first slide.
Well, one of the questions was, what time zone are we in?
Oh, this was from someone who was asking about the meetings. Yes, we're in the Mountain Time
We're
Zone.
Mountain Time Zone
Yes.
in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Is where
That's
we're
right.
located.
That's right. I've gotten used to doing CDPC stuff with everybody on Mountain Time Zone, but it's nice today that we have folks from other areas. Yes, we're on the
Excellent.
Mountain Time Zone, the one that everybody forgets about.
Well, what's on for tap for today?
So we're going to start off with part one, where we're going to discuss the writing aspects of grant applications. So we're going to look at the way we write the language and the way we approach our concepts so that we can communicate our ideas in a way that our funders can help us partner. And then in part two, we're going to share a little bit about budgeting tips, techniques, and strategies, because a lot of budgets are asking you to name exactly what you're spending your money for. And I think knowing what you're spending your money for is actually good, whether you're applying for a grant or not, if I'm correct. So I'm thinking that might be helpful for folks all the way around.
All the way around. I would have to agree with you on that. So as you can really see from the slides, we are kind of breaking this up. You know, for effective grant writing, it takes more than just the words on the page. You also have to be able to, you know, really share a budget that does make sense, not only to your goals, but also to the funder as well. So for today, we are very much looking at trying to combine those grant writing strategies and tips, and then linking that to a budget that is reasonable. And what else would you say about budgets that are most often done?
Feasible. Yeah, that's a nice one to have with your budget.
Reasonable, feasible,
Yes.
all the isables going on right now.
Yes.
Okay, so you can contact us at umojawellness.com. We just want to share a little bit about who we are, what goes on there.
Yes.
You can go ahead and advance that. So let's get started. Trish was able to mention earlier that a lot of this presentation for the writing components are really taken from this VDC approach. VDC is really an approach for writers to really consider their writing style. You know, most grants usually start with ideas and ideas for change. And this process of how to approach your writing does not start with the application, with the grant application. It actually starts in community. It starts from community, what is going on in community, what is happening within your agency, and how your agency is or is not connected to change elements that are going on. VDC. V stands for vision. We want in all of your grant applications, we really want to ensure that as a writer, you are communicating a clear vision for change. You know, the majority of grants involve change of some sort. Folks, funders rarely provide money just to keep things exactly the way that they are. So when you're asking for money and you're wanting to change, that element of change must be explicit. Also, for design, every grant application has a process associated with it, and that's your design elements. And one thing about design, we say that you want to be able to measure what is changing, measurable processes. So the D of VDC talks about designing measurable processes. C is about the capacity of the agency to actually fulfill the tasks that it says it can do. So in this presentation today, first I want to just share a little bit more about vision, design, and capacity, and how they work to complete or fulfill a grant application. Then we'll take a break, talk about budgets a little bit, and then come back. And I want to focus on some of the writer's takeaways. We want to talk about intentional change and how every application must be taken from the viewpoint of not only the writer, who represents the agency and the community being impacted, but also the perspective of the grant reviewer and the funder. We're going to talk a little bit about the technical CACA aspects of grant writing, and the differences between priorities and tasks in an application. And then here, this last bullet point is so salient. It's about success. For every good grant that is actually written, I guess it's a fundable grant that is written, it is because the writer was certain to name success. I've been a grant reviewer for 20 plus years, and most of the grant applications that actually did not make it, we were uncertain how change was going to be implemented. Success was not quantified or qualified. And in this short time that we have together, we really want to be able to share a few tips to help each of you as grant writers strengthen your application. Let's go right to it. And Kenneth, join in. I know that you've been writing grants for years as well.
Yes.
So just make sure that what I'm saying is making sense.
It definitely does. When you were talking about capacity,
Mm-hmm.
it went back to that word feasibility.
There it is.
Because I think we sometimes assume that good ideas are feasible ideas. And they don't always work out that way, and it depends on the environment.
Mm-hmm.
You're growing your money tree.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so but we will get to visit that as well.
For instance, who would have known that COVID
Right.
would come around, that it would be impacted?
Right.
So now programs that were previously slated, confirmed, on the table, now having to be redrafted.
Right.
So still feasible. What is feasible? Okay, let's go back now. I want to share this two things. I want to let you know first, we are going to share the 9 parts of most grants, almost any kind of a grant. And there are public grants and there are private grants. Public grants are grants that are made with public money. So they would be associated with state grants or city grants or federal grants. Private funds come from private foundations. And we have a lot of wonderful foundations in New Mexico. So we really hope that folks are really keyed into what is happening here. Every application has really 9 parts to it that we like to share in the vision, design, capacity approach. I'm gonna go back to the vision for a minute. Those vision pieces, the vision parts in grant applications require the writer to provide specific changes or results that are going to occur as because of the activities. They need to show evidence of expertise by the applicant. That means the expertise exists not only within your agency, but also amongst your staff. When you have a very successful grant, a fundable grant, you're able to elevate and share, like I said, not only how the agency is exceptional, but also your staff. Evidence-based interventions. We are taking this approach from a technical writing point of view. Technical writing is different from creative writing in that technical writing, such as grants for public health or grants for transportation, depend upon evidence. That's called data. That data is part of your evidence that you want to be able to bring forth. Now, a lot of times in your grant applications, folks may have, or an agency or your staff may come up with something new. This is the time to put it into your application, because funders see a lot of the same rehashed ideas time and time again. So letting a funder know straight up that this is a new approach to change, or we are adjusting to a new situation by doing X amount of activities, is something you want to share early on. Now, in the bottom half of the screen, you're going to see some of these 1, 2, 3, 4 types of bullets that are going to consistently stay throughout grant applications. Because whether we are talking about a vision component of a grant, a design component, or a capacity component, grant reviewers are always looking for some of these elements. First, inclusive designs and voices. Are you writing this for a community, on behalf of a community, with a community? These people that are being impacted by your services and the money, do they even know that you exist as an agency?
Yeah, is it about power over and power with? Too, from a social work point of view, a lot of funders will, write as if they're going to do something to a community, at a community, and not with the community. And so all of these parts are very valuable. And I don't know that they're always values of funders still. However, they might be values of the organizations that we represent, and they usually turn out to be best practices. They're improving your capacity when you practice this way.
Let me give you an example. A few years ago, the Centers for Disease Control had this new disease that they were dealing with called HIV. At that time, HIV was really impacting a lot of different communities. And there was an intervention that was promised, and they said prevention for positives, PFP or P4P. And the HIV positive community went on its arms. It's like, you're doing something for us, but not with us. CDC heard the message. And because of voices being raised together, communities coming together, it is now known as prevention with positives.
They were held accountable. They maintained those relationships by including people, being inclusive, and putting some sustainable protocols in place.
Exactly.
And allowing their system to be informed.
It is.
Right.
The best grants are actually written together. It's not just one person's voice or ideas. As great as they may be, when you often include other people into the design of your programs and your activities, they're actually stronger, more relevant, and more cost efficient. Systemic accountability is always something that is looked for within a grant. Are you accountable to the money? Are you accountable to your clients? And are you accountable to your staff? That accountability for staff would include things like a safety plan. If you're putting your staff in community, are you able to provide them with some type of wraparound care? So how does your grant application demonstrate inclusivity of the voices and the consumers, systemic accountability, relationships to outside campaigns or initiatives? Is no one else in the state working on tobacco control? Is there a coordinated effort to address this?
And are you working with them? Are you holding each other accountable? All that sort of
What's the difference? And then also think about the vision of sustainability. Are you going for this community change only for a year, for 2 years, or for 5 years? These are all questions that you as a writer have to address. Let's go to the design elements, please. Now, design elements are often linked to things that are called the timeline or the work plan. And in the timeline or work plan, again, you want to link your agency expertise to the current application, making sure that you have identified who within your organization or your network or coalition is bringing the expertise to effect change. This is where we include SMART goals and objectives. We have a calendar of sorts to say we know that we should be doing these activities on time in month 3 or month 4. And again, cohesion. When you have a work plan, all of these parts are supposed to work together. And that's exactly what we strive for in a successful grant. You know, in a little bit, I'll be talking about the writer, the grant reviewer, and also the funder again. And I just want to point out early that, you know, grant reviewers only have one job. Yeah, that one job is to put the applications that they're reviewing into pile A or pile B.
Right.
And one of those piles does not go up to the funder.
Could not read.
So even in the design, you still have to be able to show things like inclusive designs, which might show up in your objectives, accountability, which will probably show up in your indicators, which talk about relationships and sustainabilities. And then capacity, because I want to be sure we get over to these budgeting slides here. You know, budgets are a necessary part, and thank goodness this one's here to share some of his tips and tricks. You're going to really love the slides once you guys get this.
Yep. And remember, time is money. So when you're looking at timelines and responsibilities, the lights stay on whether there's a check being deposited that day or not. So we're going to definitely be checking in on that.
Okay. So speaking of lights on, the agency lights on, this is an example also of capacity. Again, as a grant writer or as an organization, you can have the best ideas in the world. Do you have the capacity to throw them off? In your writing style, again, some things are consistently need to be reiterated. One, talk about your expertise. It's in there, otherwise you would be going for it. So again, let the funders and the reviewers understand that you have what it takes as an agency to be successful. And here I want to point out, if you cannot name success in your grant, you are not ready to write the application at all. Your grant needs to clearly name success. So there is a point in this particular presentation where we want to show you what success means. So please, if you can think of a project that you currently want to fund, as we continue to talk, please kind of focus on that project. We want to show you where you can insert it and maybe get some ideas a little bit later on.
So is this like a vision statement in a way? You know, I'm saying to have a vision statement for a grant, and your vision statement kind of names what success looks like.
Well, actually, in a grant, the vision statement is your outcome. And that's part of your SMART objectives.
Okay.
Your outcome really tells what is going to change, and that is the focus of vision for all grants. And that's a clue.
That's an important distinction.
That's an important distinction. And an outcome is a benefit. It can be a benefit to a person, a benefit to a family, a benefit to a building. I mean, imagine if you were to have a youth center, what could that possibly benefit? Some youth center, who knows? That's a building. You can have a benefit to the environment. Imagine what clean drinking water or clean air might do to our bodies, our health, and our ability to function well. So outcomes are benefits. And that is what you want to make sure you can focus on within a grant.
Because I can count those.
Yes.
They have a price associated with them.
Yes, they do.
They generally have a profit associated with them.
Yes, they will. Promise to share something about that.
That's
too.
right. Yeah.
This one loves profits, trust me.
Profit is not a bad word. Just want to put that out there. Anyway.
All right, capacity. Authenticity. Authenticity of connections between partners, communities, populations, and or issues of being addressed. It's like, what is the authenticity of the grant idea to our community? Is this real or not? And is that same sense of urgency being expounded within your grant application?
And let me mention something about this, because I have read grants by really good writers who don't seem to have a relationship with the effective partners or the population at all. And it comes off as inauthentic, actually.
Right.
Yeah.
There have been use of pronouns discussed a lot in in the granting world. Are we able to use the word we in a grant?
Right.
Do we use these pronouns of ownership, our, or do we always stay on the periphery, they or them?
I've learned a lot about using those words myself. Oh yeah.
So, and that is a question that every agency has to decide for itself, along with your grant writer. A lot of times, grant writers are devoid from some of the decisions of the agency or the entity or the leadership, and that can be improved. For instance, there needs to be a relationship between the grant writer and the fiscal team.
Right.
We're going to cover that later.
Yes, definitely.
I'm going to let you guys read this. I want to kind of go on and have one more slide before we get to Kenneth. And in this slide, we really wanted to be able to share with you. Yeah. Oh, the 9 parts of most grants. Almost every grant or application has 9 different sections to it. And these sections, of course, correlate to the VDC approach. There are some sections that are vision elements, like the letter of intent. When you tell a funder, we want your money, we're coming for it, and this is what we're going to do. That's a vision. Your abstract, usually a long paragraph, a vision. A program narrative is a story. You're talking about change, also a vision. You're not doing anything, you're just sharing what your vision for change looks like. And the mission statement is your legal vision for being even operating on the planet.
And that narrative is where I'm looking for you to describe to me from a therapist point of view. I'm looking at how the family members interact in a session. So in the narrative, I want to hear, what's the narrative of a good day for your family, for you and your partners? What does a good functional day look like?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And in a grant application, the narrative will be, what is going on in this community? What the data points that are indicating that there is something afoot that we want to change.
Right.
So that's also part of that. So let's look at the design elements in grants. Now, design has the organizational summary. People say, organizational summary, design? Well, you see, design is intentional. And your organizational summary needs to be intentional. In a grant application, you need to tell me as a funder how you intentionally planned and worked your way to success.
So the metaphor I was kind of thinking of recently was an archer. And so the archer has to get in a certain posture, has to have the right tools, has to have the capacity to see the target, and then has to intend on a very clear target. The archer doesn't say, we're going to vaguely-ish this area here. No.
Archer goes for,
that's right.
Bullseye.
This ball in this pocket. Okay.
There you go.
Yeah, that's what we're
there you go. Yeah. So success is intentional, especially in a grant application, because what you want to communicate with the funder is capability. You want to relay to the funder how your organization is the best organization to receive those funds. I hope someone said our slides are blurring. We'll try to keep them still.
All right. I'm not sure how we'll affect that.
Yeah, well, we'll keep on, and then you can request those and you can have them. Just kind of hang out with us for a little bit.
Yes.
Now, the program description is often what is called a timeline or a work plan. And then one of the other parts of design is part of the evaluation. Every technical grant, you have to define how you are successful, and that is through evaluation. Part of evaluation is design. The other part of evaluation is capacity, and the part that is capacity is the analysis. For evaluation, you can collect data all day long. After you collect it, because that's part of your design element, you used a focus group or a post test, or you used another type of a methodology. What happens to all of that then? can you then take that and then report on your successful efforts?
That makes you think about money.
That it should, because this is where we want to turn it over to you.
It makes me think about money because my evaluation and my methodology invite that quantitative questioning now. How many X's for how many Y's?
Correct.
How much do I need to know about how many people?
Mm-hmm.
And every time I ask the question, how many, I am immediately struck by how many dollars.
All right.
Right. Because
Mm-hmm.
anytime there's a how many question,
Mm-hmm.
how many dollars, right?
How many, how much?
Right. And all of that.
Mm-hmm.
So, all right. So we are going to take a look at how that works, but I wanted to kind of open it up a little bit because we've gone pretty straightforward, and I wanted to see if there were questions that we might answer at this point, or anything we might review.
We can go to Trish. Trish, can you help us, or Devana, if there are any questions you think we can address?
Points of clarification.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Right now, so far, the only question we've had is can we get our hands on those slides?
Yes, you can get
absolutely.
Your hands on these slides.
Absolutely.
So we'll send them out to all the attendees after this program. Thank you.
Right on. Okay, so I see a question here from.
And there is one that says explain methodology as a capacity element.
Okay.
Yes.
So for example, we would say I would love to be able to survey all of the African Americans in New Mexico around a specific health outcome.
Mm-hmm.
And then I also have to realize that all of the African Americans in New Mexico are distributed, like most of the population, in nooks, crannies, mountains, valleys, highways, canyons, byways, unimproved roads, and other such hard to reach places.
Mm-hmm.
So my methodology now becomes a capacity element because I might not have the capacity to get to certain communities.
Mm-hmm.
And then I have to deal with that as a factor of what that means when I have the power that comes with the grant.
Mm-hmm.
Because it may mean that I'm not the best agency if I'm only applying to work with people in Bernalillo County all the time. And it's supposed to be a statewide funded project, right? So does that kind of, I hope that kind of helps a little bit.
Let me add, because that is really an indication of reach.
Yes.
What is your reach?
Yes.
And then also, again, when it comes to, even if you do reach every last single African American in the state, how long is it going to take your agency to turn around that data to make it useful?
Mm-hmm.
Because we don't just collect data to just put it into a shelf or to include it onto an online report. The best data is then implemented. I think they call that theory to practice.
That's basically what it is. And I mean, it comes down to as simple as when I first started doing social work in New Mexico, I'm still kind of new to New Mexico, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And I ended up somewhere and was concerned about whether or not I had the gas to get back home. So I mean,
and he stayed.
No, well, I mean, it was in Moriarty. And I drove all the way to Moriarty, and it didn't occur to me, that I might need gas, or that there might not be a gas station too quick, to find. And so all of this, I think, really, really important. So yeah, when the analysis is done, how do you demonstrate what will be done with it when one isn't even yet sure what those results will be? So now there are certain kinds of funding streams. I think this question is around the kind of funding you're going after. There are more exploratory funding streams. And so sometimes when you don't know what the results will be, you're looking at some sort of task group that is tasked with a needs assessment of some sort. You might have a planning grant where the grant is solely for the purpose of answering the question of how we will decide what the results will be. So you can actually get funding to come about. What we want to see is a methodological process a methodology put about the problem solving. And so then we can trust that a solution is found if we know that there's a methodical problem solving approach in your narrative and in your evaluation methodology. You're going to be describing to me how you don't know what you know, how you discovered you didn't know what you knew, and the first few questions that you're going to ask to learn how to discover what you don't know. Does that make sense?
No, that didn't. But,
Everybody repeat after me.
But here's something that might. If you aren't sure what will be done with the data that you are going to receive, that's when you do rely on the expertise in the room.
Right.
So that's when you'll say, according to what we receive, we're going to rely back on those folks who help us put this stuff together, and we're going to find a way to make this practical and applicable.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay.
So and then let's see. We explain where the current stats or current community problem would be included in a program narrative or program. It depends on the funding, I would say. But it sounds like the problem you want to solve is in the narrative.
Yes, that is
because that explains to me how you and your partners became
correct.
so inspired and fell in love with one another and wanted to do this thing. So I'm leaning towards the narrative.
Yes.
Unless the program description is like some funding is to describe a community.
Well,
you know.
The program description, since that's a work plan or a timeline,
right?
You might look for an indicator in the work plan or timeline. By month 6, we should have reached 35%.
That's right.
Of our expected number of participants.
And that would be
an example. That's in the program description.
Right. Okay.
Otherwise, I would put statistics in the narrative. And you can put them into 2 places in the narrative. One would be in the opening sentence, in the not sentence, opening paragraph.
Right.
In the opening paragraph.
Yeah.
Somewhere up in there early, so you can talk about how the data that the community experiencing is early in the minds of the grant reviewer, and then a little bit lower, again, the narrative as well.
And no excuses in New Mexico for data.
Oh, well,
there's data abound. There's data up there in their hills. How accessible is it? Can be a little tricky. You have to be persistent, but we have been pleasantly surprised to learn that data do exist.
Absolutely.
Data do exist. Okay, what do you need in terms of a work plan or a project plan?
Right.
How much detail?
Let me get that one.
Right on.
For work plans and project plans, when they are submitted, they are usually not a complete sentence. The only part that is usually a complete sentence is if those are your objectives. Those are stated in a single sentence, and they have to be SMART: specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-based. How much detail? That does depend upon your funder. Most often, the work plan or project plan is a chart that is submitted by the funder to complete, and they'll let you know what's important to them. If they do not provide that, then you will have to kind of give them a call.
And I would say it's a matter of grammar, content, and organization around just plain old size of the grant.
There you go.
If they give me 100 pages, I'm gonna break it down.
Right.
It gives me a chance to think out loud too and flesh out my thoughts. But sometimes a lot of funders have a shorter application. So I do encourage folks to think really, I encourage people to think in as much detail as possible.
Yes.
I do believe that dreams are made of details.
Very good.
I do. Yes.
Let's go on now. Thank you so much for your questions. We really want this presentation to work for you.
Yes.
So we are very much hoping that you'll let us know when we can clarify or go on.
Definitely. And jump in. And we're keeping our eye on the chat window.
Yes.
So let's talk about that money part. Money part. So
Resources, money.
before we get into this, everybody, okay, because I know money is a difficult topic for people. It is a difficult topic indeed.
It is.
If you say ah, your brain feels good. So say ah or smile. Those are two-way signals between your brain and your body. If you say ah, you feel good. And if you feel good, you say ah, okay? So, but yes, money is in harmony with nature. It grows, and like us, it involves our responses to the environment. It has cells, so like a living object. Pennies make up dollars, dollars make up millions of dollars. It feeds on economic activity. So money usually needs something to keep going. It needs to be spent and reinvested and brought back. And it needs to have more than one dimension. But most of the time, we can't just leave money sitting where it is, because otherwise it just loses its value. Money can reproduce like a living organism in good partnership. We can make a lot more money together than we do alone. So when we're doing our MOUs and our letters of intent and we're naming our partners, this is how we know we can grow that money. It also reflects how it was earned. And so in that way, it kind of carries with it traits. Money can come with certain taxes, certain duties to report on that money. There can be interest rate on loans. So money definitely has a sort of signature with how it comes. So these are all the attributes of something that's alive. And you can see how money can fit that definition pretty well. So finally, we also can understand that money can gain value. It won't lose value under normal circumstances if we invest it properly. So in that sense, it even has a capacity for growth. So now, these are all things associated with an intention around the money, okay? So the intention is usually to grow the money. Your funder wants you to grow your money, the money they give you, into an outcome. Is that fair enough? Right. They want you to change from one thing to the other. So now, for those of you who are Trekkies, there's an alien race. I know it's a pretty awesome looking character there if you don't know who it is. But this race is called the Ferengi, and the Ferengi are otherworldly in their pursuit of profit and financial enterprise. Okay. And so, and of course, in the future where these people exist, the humans are idealistic and they give things for free, you know. And so this alien, he looks at them and he goes, you know, what is this free thing? What is that about, you know? But it's, I think, a profound question to ask ourselves, because so many of our organizations get caught up doing things that we don't get paid to do.
Correct. And I also want to point out here that nonprofit doesn't mean that you have to give it away.
No. So, and let me just clarify. Nonprofit means the laws of acquisition. Right on, Dr. McIver. The notion of profit, well, first of all, a nonprofit status is a very specific tax status that allows people to write off from the government what they've given your organization. Okay, so that's the first definition of that. It's nothing to do with whether or not you make a profit. The second implication of being a nonprofit is that you have to have a board. There's more than one person involved in most states for the incorporation of a nonprofit. And so funders know that more brains are better than one. 2 heads are better than one, 3 heads are better than one. Most states require 3 people to be on the board. So the fact that you're a nonprofit implies that you are a concerted group of thinkers who have a relationship and an intention to one another. That's what distinguishes a nonprofit.
There are a couple of other things.
Yeah.
A nonprofit does not belong to a person.
No.
A nonprofit belongs to the community that it was meant to serve.
That's right. That's
to
right.
serve.
Speaking of accountability.
Accountability.
Right.
It is not an empire.
That's right.
It is a vehicle for change.
That's right.
And also it is a tax It is a tax, it's a tax structured entity
That's right.
that is taxed differently.
That's it.
So
Yep.
those things don't equal free. They
Right.
just say that there's a different relationship that has to be acknowledged
That's it.
and responded to.
That's it.
All right.
That's what it's about. Thank you, Gail. Nonprofit is a tax status,
Not a way of life.
Yeah.
Someone knows what they're talking about there, I believe.
The little happy spiritual dance there on that one.
All right.
I'm telling you.
All right.
Let's see here. So, okay, the other text, there it is. So some earnings that we get are like leaves. Some blow away, some fly us. Okay, so that's like medical care. I have claims that get paid. I have claims that don't get paid. In commission sales, I have a good deal on something or not. It doesn't always work out the same way. And so sometimes the leaves blow into the bag. Sometimes they blow away from me. And fingers crossed, prayers sent to heaven, it balances out, right? So,
Okay.
and it's not impossible to sustain yourself at a model like that. So now some of us have a different kind of tree. You might have your money tree that makes something that looks more like an apple or something that looks more like these dollars on this tree. And that's when your earnings are pretty clear. I've produced a Lamborghini. I sold the Lamborghini for $4 million. I have $4 million for a Lamborghini. That's pulling it off more like an apple from the tree than a leaf from the tree. They don't really blow away. I get a bushel of apples. I have a fixed amount. And so some of your funding and some of your deliverables can look like either or of those. So you can have a pre-negotiated service where you fix that price, or you might even work in an industry where the prices are regulated. Some medical, some of our healthcare outreach is regulated by pricing. Legal services and loan rates are also often regulated. So in that sense, you know that when you pull off of your tree, you're going to get that, and you're probably going to hold on to whatever it is that you grabbed. So what are your variables? All right. So you've got light, you got water, you got soil in this tree that we're going to call your money tree. And I always think of light, soil, and water as like visibility. And water is like liquidity. That's the cash that I needed to make sure I got back from Moriarty that day. I needed liquid cash. I needed liquid gas.
I wasn't going to say that,
right?
Anyway.
And then you also want to look at your stability. And these sound like things that are related to capacity, I think, huh?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Right.
Whether you're growing your tree or you're growing a program, you know, that relationship that are with the parts of your program, they're very much alive.
Right.
They very much answer what you're pointing to right now.
That's right. And so you have, you know, those variables for us are going to be your who, your what, your when, your where, and your how. I'm not a big fan of why, because all of that's in your grant, right?
That's correct.
Yeah.
That's correct.
But your funder wants to know who's doing it, what you're going to do, when you're going to do it, where you're going to do it, and how you're going to do it.
Can I just stop you there? All right. Who, right? So you're telling me that in a grant, I need to know how much people are going to be paid.
Oh, yes.
Or if they're just going to volunteer everything that they do.
Because how is how much? How will people be compensated for their work in this? Yeah, that's how.
So then the what do you mean the what has a fixed price to it? I mean things like running a campaign or putting a needle in an arm.
Facilitating a workshop.
I mean, that's a what? That costs money.
Yeah.
Stop joking.
See, these things, because there's light on in here and computers running and stuff. And what is this free? They did not give it to me for free. No, yeah.
Please remember this, folks.
Yeah, P&M ain't playing. So right. I don't know how we do it for free.
All right. Okay. I'll let you go on. Let me go on.
It's good stuff to think about. So now this is the part where most people go, okay, so
you take breath.
Again, let it out. Breathe with me. Yes, you want to look at all of those variables, and you want to look at how they factor in as parts of your budget. And so you're going to have your income, you're going to have your money, you're going to count new money. So there are times when you get paid for things that you don't normally get paid for. There are things that you get paid for on a regular basis. So you really want to go to sit, and your program narrative is playing out in your head over time. When I go from week to week and I determine that on this particular week, I'm supposed to have this much money coming in. Maybe I'm counting it by revenue generating staff. So Mary, Soon, Orisa, and Tyrone are all responsible for bringing in a certain amount of money, or their work is going to bring in a certain amount of money. So I'm just going to look at that as our income. And so for us, it's clinical income because we're a clinic. And then we have our expenses and things like the leave that I need to have set aside for any amount of staff that have recruited. I need to consider how much money they're going to get paid in salaries. Down at the bottom, I count how much I need to pay them in taxes. And that line in actuality looks a lot more complicated. But I would say as a general rule, I usually do 35% for a position. So if I'm paying you $1 a year, then I'm gonna say your position costs $1.35. Okay. So, and that's gonna be the taxes I pay, that's gonna be any benefits that I offer. And at our agency, we tend to lean towards positions, either part-time or full-time, so that people get a regular pay, and so that we don't actually end up leaving the folks who work with us with a tax balance as self-employed people.
Right. And taxes include state and federal, by the way.
Gross receipts in New Mexico, very obscure animal.
Right. No. So for those of you who are not in New Mexico, please figure this out for real.
Yeah. But don't play.
Don't play.
You need a CPA. Okay.
True.
I'm not, now you can do this spreadsheet. You can do this spreadsheet like Bill Gates does, a Microsoft Excel spreadsheet, and you still need a CPA. So why do I need a CPA, Jay?
Well, for one thing, when it comes to writing grants, a lot of grants want to know how you spend your money and how you're accountable for your money. And when you have that thing called a conversation with a CPA, I think that's what they call it, a conversation.
That's what you have to have.
That's when you talk to a CPA and learn how does our agency keep all this money safe? What processes do we use? What are the GAA, generally accepted accounting practices?
Yes.
GAAP, GAAP, generally accepted accounting practices.
And generally accepted is not intuitive. Lord, don't think it's intuitive. You can't intuit it. And if any of you remember the savings and loan scandals of years ago, there was a piece of legislation called Sarbanes-Oxley that specifically makes accounting much less intuitive. So just don't play. Get your CPA. And a skilled bookkeeper is fine. But the difference between a bookkeeper and a CPA is that my CPA can produce a legitimate audit at the fly of a hat. So if I say I need an audit, he can produce that audit, or she can produce that audit. Yeah, mine happens to be male, and has a great number of very smart women on the staff. But there are a number of those reports that funders will want to have certified by a public accountant, hence the term. So just understand that that's important. What are the average costs for a CPA for a small nonprofit? You know what, I would just say, put yourself at $500 at least. If you're going for a lot of the grants that I just understand that this community probably represents, an entity of the size that has the capacity to do a lot of the work that requires a grant review process, this is going to start off at $400 a month. You're going to need about $400 a month. QuickBooks, Peachtree, some of those subscriptions as software, services software, they often have bookkeeping and CPA partners that they can refer you to. I, encourage you to get someone local because I'm a microeconomist also, but also the obscurity of gross receipts tax in New Mexico is really, really important to think about. And so it's very, key to find yourself a really good accountant.
Also, you probably should be thinking about that once you start bringing in income over $50,000 to $75,000.
Definitely.
That's when you need to go beyond Excel.
It really is. I mean, I use Excel. This thing that you all see here is actually just a rip out with some dummy numbers of the sheet that I use to do projections and to track bookkeeping. But this started off literally in 19 something on the back of an envelope. This was the way I was starting to do things when I had a very small business as a designer. And then I started to, learn that I could do this much more effectively and cast projections by using, averages and things like that. And I try to, make sure that I count what's left over from each period or what's in excess from each period. Because, for example, the insurance company might take 6 weeks to pay a claim, but the lights still have to be on,
every day.
Computers have to run. So I have to look at how to use money that we get to extend itself over the timeline. And so as you're thinking of your program narrative, think about cash dropped. How long does cash last until cash drops again? How many trips to Moriarty can I make before I, run out of steam? So,
Right.
Right.
For those program folks looking at this budget, go back to the who, what, when, where, and how. And when you think about that and then look at the spreadsheet that we were sharing, if you're a little bit more right-brained, go back to some of your founding questions.
Right.
Who's going to do this? Oh, well, that means, do they come with the price?
Right.
What are they doing? Can we break it down? What are they using? What materials are being brought in? When do these activities happen? Do we need everybody to be paid in April?
Is it in the month of February?
Right.
Which is a nightmare for a lot of business because everything has to happen on a monthly basis, but it's the shortest period. So thinking about how you're interacting with things like your holiday season, that's a drag on productivity. If you're doing anything after November 15th, before January 15th, expect very low productivity. So unless it's retail, right? So yeah, you want to think about where you're planting that tree. That's your soil, is your when, your where is your soil, your what is what you're producing, and your who is who the gardener is, who's watering it, who's doing the work of the task. And how is how we all get along, how we all know what needs to be done and when, and how we know when we're done. Okay. And so those are all important factors for that.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, we're going to move a little bit more back into the writing style.
Yes.
So again, all of this works together when it really comes into looking at an application. Do you think we should take some questions first?
Yeah, let's go ahead and take some questions.
Before we go too far.
Yes. So can we recommend this to be, I'm remiss to recommend a CPA in a large milieu because that's something that might not come off as appropriate. However, what I recommend is that you interview a CPA the way you interview a doctor. This person is going to have their hands in your financial body,
correct,
as a surgeon will. And so I strongly encourage you to search hard and long, feel trusting feelings before you commit to the accountant you have. I met my accountant working as a consultant for another nonprofit agency, and we worked together off and on for many years. And so when I decided to open a healthcare agency, I knew that he had specialized in work with healthcare entities and nonprofits. So just like we would say for you, when you're writing to your funder, you need to show your expertise. I dare say you want the same of your partners and vendors when you're servicing your contracts.
I think this is also important, an important part of why agencies are encouraged to join networks and coalitions, and that there is some intentional sharing in your networks. Let folks know who's really working with you well. This is a really great question. When it comes to the finances, I don't think that agency leaderships are really sharing this information consistently enough amongst themselves.
I agree.
So,
I'm gonna jump in there, Jay, and because you bring up a perfect opportunity for us to do another advertising for our the CDP's grant. We want to build this coalition, this health community health funding alliance, where we can write grants together, partner with other organizations, and apply for grants. So I'm going to throw that back in there. So if anybody's really interested in that, drop your name in the chat and your email. We'd appreciate that.
Yeah,
And moving on with that, there's a question from Turi. Is there more funding opportunities for public or private grants? Do you have any feeling for that?
Yeah, depends on the industry.
Oh my goodness, it does.
Yeah.
There is so much money
On
out
both
there.
sides. I mean, profit is not bad,
Right,
and there is not a lack of money on the planet. Now,
correct.
there might be a lack of sharing. That's a different problem altogether. But there's not a lack of money. And there really isn't a lack of money for the kinds of things that we do, for the kind of healthcare, health outreach, primary, secondary, and tertiary intervention, primary being prevention, secondary being intervention, and tertiary being intervention on crisis. So all of these three parts of the healthcare delivery stream are thirsty for collaborative partners who can produce measurable outcomes.
There it is.
And it sounds simple, but it's really profound. And we want everybody to put their hand in that pot. And that's why we're doing this, because we know that as partners around CDPC, that there is so much money out there. The lack of access to the money has to do with the lack of clarity on the ask.
Right.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That leads to the next question, which is, when the analysis is done, you just talked about measurable outcomes. How do you demonstrate what will be done with it when one isn't even sure what those results will be?
Right. Yeah. That goes back to that. Yeah, it does. And it depends what sometimes the result, well, the funder often has the nature of the result in the ask. Okay.
Correct.
And so are Black people in New Mexico disproportionately affected by environmental pollutants? So it sounds like a yes or no question until you start to investigate it. And we don't know the answer to the question, so we don't really know what we're going to do after we get the answer to that question. But there is funding out there to discover what we're going to do when we get the answer to that question. Yeah, John asked, like, how, right?
Yeah.
You know, how do we ask that question? How do we answer that question? How do we go about knowing that we've answered that question by setting a measurable size of a sample and all of that really interesting stuff that I also like to do with numbers. Yeah.
Okay, another question from Elba. Can you explain where you think current stats would be included? Would they be in the program narrative, the program description, both?
Yeah,
right. I think we got that one. Yeah, but we were saying the program narrative.
Yeah.
The program narrative is typically where you explain how you discovered the problem and how you and your partners came together to be inspired with some sort of solution, with something that looks like a solution.
Right. Yeah, it's a very poor grant that brings up questions that it doesn't seek to solve.
Right. Yeah.
You know, so definitely.
Yeah.
You know, also, I think if you are trying to commit to a solution, like you say, oh, we are going to find out what are the best 3 ways to work with it's like introducing the vaccine to a hesitant population. We don't know what those 3 solutions are yet, but we know that they're on the table. Part of what you want to do is, who is the focus of your grant? Do you have a specific population in mind? That population can be ethnic, racial population. It could also be a population of providers. With this information, whatever we get, we're going to go back to our providers and show them a new way to implement a new way to implement our findings.
Okay.
And those findings
Mhm.
can be implemented either through a publication, they can be implemented through our networks and coalitions, through in-services, they can be implemented through a book, they can be implemented through teaching. If you're trying to solve an issue, who's going to benefit from it?
Right.
And then how do you then relay your successful intent to your same population?
Right. Yeah. So John is asking more about the how part, I guess, how we handle things. And I was trying to get a little bit of elaboration on that. But I think how is probably methodology. The first word that comes to mind when somebody says how in a grant is methodology. Thank you, John. So in the methodology, I talk about how I find out Black people are being impacted by environmental pollutants. So that's my methodology.
Formative research.
That's formative research. That's right. And all of your quantitative research classes will inform that one. The other how is how we sustain ourselves. So volunteers versus paid employees and stuff like that, I think, which may not necessarily come up as methodology per se, but it is a kind of how. And then I think the other how might be the nature of the relationships between you and your partners, because how you all work together and function together is also very, very important. So yeah, I hope that answers John's question. That probably answers somebody's question.
Somebody somewhere,
right?
Well, grant writing, the process of program development. This is really about program. There are so many types of funding vehicles, and writing grants is just one way to bring money into an organization. There are at least 10 different ways that I'm aware of. And you have to go into one of my classes to find out the other 9. But with grant writing, what we really want to, for technical grant writing, we really want writers to become familiar with data.
Yes.
Because we want to talk about data, and like data, a lot of times data means people, it means families, it means communities, it's individuals. So we have to also know that behind those numbers, the relationship that we're trying to share in an application is still respectful to the humans behind the numbers. Right. So even though we're talking about data, we're also talking about community values, because we want to change something. Remember, the point of most grants is to change something. That's it's right. Not to keep things exactly the way that we are.
And to change something that impacts people.
Correct. Okay. Usually so, in public health.
Even if the grant is to count snowflakes, it's because somebody didn't get enough snow somewhere.
Right.
So I'm going to impact people with that.
Okay. Right. Yes. And need.
Yes.
Right. So need is the data point. So how do you define your community? How do you talk about who is there? You've got to use something that is a bit technical, dispassionate, and that's data. And, I want to remind our writers that usually there are 3 kinds of data that we like to include within grants. You have primary data, that is data that is made up within your own agency systematically. When you systematically have people sign a sign-in sheet, that's primary data. When you do a focus group on a question, your own agency, that's primary data.
Survey Monkey, you wrote the question, you emailed it out, you received the answer, that's primary.
That's data that your agency owns.
Right.
There's secondary data. Secondary data is like outside data, like
IBIS,
census data.
The IBIS website that we
New
use
Mexico
in New
IBIS.
Mexico.
The American Community Survey,
ArcGIS,
the
Burfus.
Those are secondary sources.
Yeah.
Secondary sources go to support primary findings.
Right.
So once you get once you have an idea of your own agency, hey, in our agency, we see that.
So we didn't get to ski this year. There
Mhm.
wasn't enough snow here.
There you go.
Let's call Angel Fire, Santa Fe, and all of them and get their secondary data to find out how much snow they got out there. Right.
So that's secondary data. Then the third kind is called anecdotal information. And anecdotal information is that he said, she said, I found out from the grocery store
I heard
that.
sometimes it doesn't snow on
Mhm.
even dated years, even numbered years. Right.
And that information is still valid.
Yep.
It's very valid. You just have to call it for what it is. It is information that is not systematically collected. Now, if you systematically go down to your favorite grocery store and ask the same question for 3 weeks in a row, that's primary data.
Right.
Anecdotal information has somehow switched over to primary data. So this is, and as a grant writer, you must be ready to define and describe your community based on something. And we want to say data is going for it. So let's go on.
Mhm.
Now, one of the things that we really want to be able to talk about is this thing about intentional change over time. Now, if you will recall earlier, I asked if you guys would please just think about a project. Think about a project that you really want to have funded. And when you think about that project, please put it in that circle that says intended outcome. Now, you're going to see that there is, of course, this conscious intention about choices and stuff that are getting to that. And as a writer, that conscious intention and the red arrows, those are all what we struggle with. Really being able to find some of the words to really describe what the point of it is. And like you mentioned, Kenneth, an arrow has a point.
Yeah.
Your writing
Might want to have a point.
a point. Your intended outcome needs to be a point.
Because sometimes we're inspired to talk around a subject and
There
about
it
a
is.
subject,
There it is.
and we're not really sure what the opportunities for change are.
Mhm.
And those are great exercises to undertake for your company's retreat
Mhm.
or for your own musing,
Mhm.
but don't submit it as a grant application.
Unless you have a research grant.
And yeah,
If
they
that's a
can,
research grant, that's appropriate.
and even then, your research tends to be linear, right? And so I have a great appreciation for right brain. I'm an artist. I have a great appreciation for circularity.
Mhm.
And I know that funders don't. That's
Mhm.
all.
Not often.
No.
Well, actually, I actually want to get there.
Mhm.
Still, folks, hang
Yeah.
on to your intended outcome. Keep it right there. All right. And this were intentional change over time. Let's go to the next slide. I want to make sure we get through everything.
Yes.
When it comes to the grant application, there is the writer, the reviewer, and the funder. The writer is you. You as the writer have to represent not only your agency or your organization, maybe a network, you also have to represent the community that you are seeking to enforce or engage in change. That's a huge job. But not only that, as a writer, that application that you're completing is going to get to a reviewer before it gets to a funder. And I want to say this very clearly. Funders want to give out money.
They do. Yep, they do. They want to give it out.
They want to
They
give
want
out
to give it out.
money.
Right? Because they've set an intention at the beginning
That's
of the
it.
year before you knew you
That's
wanted
it.
a grant
That is exactly
to give
it.
out this money.
Mhm.
And there are accountability streams. There's, accountability streams that'll take the money back if it doesn't get given out and all that kind of stuff.
Mhm.
So it's not that a funder is not wanting to give you the money.
No, there's
They
this
just want to know
thing,
you can receive it.
right? And there's this thing called a grant application that they said, we have money to give. This grant application is a vehicle for us to disseminate it.
Yes.
Why don't you answer some of these questions for us? One of the
Right.
things that they're really going to ask is that you clearly figure out a way to say what's changing. I give you money, what changes? That has to be thought through. And that is also why funders have grant reviewers. Grant reviewers are not required to be imaginative or figure out what you meant to write. They aren't supposed to do anything other than look at what the writer put on the page. And from what the writer put on the page, does it match with what the funder wants to release this money for?
Right.
So please, as a writer, you must do your due diligence and find out, why is a funder giving this money out?
Right, right.
You know, and
Yeah.
where do you go in these days in the 21st century? We can go right to the website.
And so with this question, the who is the writer, the reviewer, and the funder.
Hello.
Don't forget that we're all in a partnership.
We're in a partnership.
The writer, the reviewer, and the funder all are in a partnership to get this money to turn into a resource folks need. The what are these things that I'm measuring and changing. And I don't need my reviewer to try to figure out who and what and how. That's not their job to imagine that. So the who, what, and how really need to be explained in my narrative and in my methodology.
Correct.
Okay. So who, what, when, where, and how. When, of course, is always
Definitely the timeline.
a factor of your timeline. That's right. And we want to be clear about that. We don't want grant reviewers to say, oh, imagine it'll take about a year to get this done. No, you want to be very clear about all of that.
Precision. Again, this is technical writing. Now, I kind of want to do this also when it comes to technical writing. Please, my friends, learn to use a period correctly. There is a difference between talking and writing. I can talk all day long and never use a period because I can depend upon a comma, I can depend upon an and, I can somehow make these things link together, but sometimes you're still wondering where and where am I getting to?
It just takes a because or an and.
It just goes on and on and on. I mean, it's like, and people talk like that and they write like that, and that's not a strong application. You know, when it comes to really writing a strong application, a period has to be your best friend.
I will advocate for Microsoft Word and for the grammar checker in terms of sentence length. And it's informed by cognitive studies about how many words we can hold into a brain before we want to wrap it up. And a lot of times if you're working for the American Radiologic Technologic Society,
and there are some on the line,
Greater New Mexico Central Region only, then think of that as an acronym as you're counting your words. That whole long title that might be 18 words, we won't count that, okay? So just...
Well, I often ask people to remember the good old days when we could go to a buffet. And in those good old days, you could just pile your plate full of food. Yeah, right. Yeah. And then when you were there, you had fork in one hand and spoon, maybe knife in the other. And I've seen people at a buffet just put their face down into the plate and start eating. And the thing I come away with is, did you taste your food?
Right.
In a well-written grant application, every sentence is a bite. And in that bite, you are able to clearly understand what is happening, why it's important, and there's a reason for it. Don't cram words down the reviewer's mind or their throat.
And it's a good way to go back to, like you're saying, start from that. When you read that sentence, how is it informing who, what, when, where, and how? And to be honest with you, if it's not really informing who, what, when, where, and how, it could just be a great inspiration thought that you have that doesn't necessarily need to go on paper.
And the page, my friends, is technical writers work with words, thoughts, and data. And if you'll go to the next slide, this next slide, this is really called our technical caca. And for those of you who are too young to understand what caca is another word for communication.
A good money tree needs good fertilizer.
Yes.
And caca makes good fertilizer.
Great.
Yes, it does.
And so your technical caca are your sentences, are your paragraphs, and are your thoughts clear? Are they easily understood by your audience? Are they accurate based on factual data? Are they correct? Do they follow grammatical and technical rules? Now, in this one, this is important to the funder because if a funder is unable to understand your writing in your application, they may not be able to understand your reports. So if what they get is incorrect grammar, then on the application, then they're looking to expect that same on the back end.
And yep. And this is what elaborates on your capacity. And so
Yes.
that's why it really is that soil.
And
it really is.
Sometimes
Yeah.
it's the capacity of assigning a proofreader.
Mhm.
Some of your other technical CACA includes comprehensive, that your application contained all the information that was requested. Did you answer every last question? Is it concise? Brevity is a plus. And is it accessible? Sometimes there are subheaders or rules. Did you include all those technical pieces that was there? Did you include the letter? Was it 508 compliant if this is a federal grantor application? So your technical CACA is important, and it starts from when you read that application. Before the first word is ever drafted, the writer should have read that application at least twice.
So I think it's 26 words in
a sentence.
Yeah, Microsoft Word. And if you go over 26 words, it's like, what are you doing? You know, this is a paragraph.
Yeah.
Right? You know,
It's way too long. Way
yeah,
too long.
Definitely.
So let's go on to the next slide. I really wanted to really point out that there's a difference between a priority versus a task. Priorities are what funders fund. Priorities are usually the basis for change in most grant applications. Tasks are what you do to get there. Now, I'm sharing here this thing called a logic model, which is absolutely useful for a writer. In this particular frame, a logic model I'm sharing 5 little boxes. The first boxes tell us, as a writer, you need to know what you have on hand. Do you have coalition members? Do you have people? Do you have a connection to the community? What do you have? Activities are based on what you do. Anytime you have something that you do, you're either going to put it in your budget, or you're going to count it as in-kind services, or you're going to say it's a volunteer. We are volunteering to spend our time to pick grass, to deliver reports or whatever. Activities is what you do. If it's a verb, it costs money.
It's kind of a how in the who, but where, when, how question.
So then outputs are what you measure. Okay, so resources are what you have.
Right.
Activities are what you do. Outputs are what you get. You can count an output. You can count how many people came into.
How many apples I picked, how many leaves I got off the tree.
There you go.
Right.
Count how many people come into your
That's
doors.
right.
You can count how many people graduated. It's an output. You can measure it. As a writer, you need to know, do we have any measurable elements at all that we can talk to our funder about? Outcomes are about benefits. Again, you can have benefit to a person, benefit to a family, a community, a building, the environment. These are benefits as an outcome. And impacts occur over time.
So we have human resources in the way of therapists and clinicians who do interventions as activities by providing therapy, medicine, all kinds of stuff. For the output,
how many clients you have?
Of having a certain number of clients, so that informs capacity.
That informs capacity. An output
Right.
might also be the number of interventions that you
we do
utilize
in a day or in a month or in a week. Yeah,
right.
Which is like 200 or 300 in a month.
How about that?
And then the outcome is a healthier community, around our
Well, if it's therapy, then it might focus on a healthy individual.
the healthy client,
Mhm.
the healthier families, and the
Mhm.
way they're experiencing their
That's
lives
right.
together.
That is correct.
And then
That's
the
correct.
impact is the healthier community.
That
right?
is a healthy
Yeah,
community,
yeah.
because then that's over time.
Yep. So sometimes it can be a little bit of a fine hair.
So are we stressing the priority or the task if you're talking about therapy then?
Well, in our model, both.
How about
So
that?
we use a treat first model, which makes a priority of providing a kind of intervention.
Mhm.
We're implementing that.
Mhm.
And then so those tasks means that everybody is prioritized and we respond with the task.
How about that?
But the size of the task can vary
Mhm.
depending on how we prioritize that urgent need,
Now,
how the client prioritizes their need.
one of the asks that I had done to the folks that are on the call, I asked you to please think about an activity that you want to have funded. All right, if you remember that, folks. And I said that a good writer is able to talk about intentional change over time. Well, in a grant application, intent is actually found in the activities. You intend to
Right.
do specific
We intend
activities.
to reduce the client's experience of trauma.
Well, that's actually an outcome.
That's an outcome.
That's an outcome.
But we do it by
You intend
providing
to provide therapy.
To
Therapy is
reduce.
what you do. That's your intentional activity.
Very good.
And then the change is in the benefits. The change is in your outcomes. Those activities lead to that outcome. And that outcome we want to happen over time.
So activities does kind of crystallize as a how, as John was asking,
There it is.
how we're doing it. Because if I'm going to reduce my client's experience of trauma, how do I do it? I do it by providing psychotherapy.
Those are your activities.
Right.
And that client their trauma is reduced.
Yes.
If their trauma is reduced over time,
Then that's an output. Or that's an outcome
There you
because
go.
right.
there
Okay.
you go.
But then how many I helped?
That would be an output.
Output. So maybe
your
thinking
count.
of outputs as a number.
Yeah, exactly. Measurable.
Yeah.
Measurable.
Right.
Measurable.
That's right.
Okay, when I write grants, and it's like every 10 grants you write, yeah, you might get 1 funded, you might get 2 funded, but you have to write 10 still, for that,
Who gets their book published on the first publisher?
Well, I'm not going to go into
Well, that-
politics.
Not
I'll
now.
leave that
anyway,
alone.
Yeah. Anymore.
When I address writing, I always start in my head, I create a writer's logic model. I seek to determine what are the things that this coalition has, this agency has, what is it that we have, because we know what we want to do. So then if that's what we have between those at the table, what are we able to do? What will we count? Who cares? And what's the result of
So let's review this one more time. Let's use laundry
Okay.
as a metaphor. 'Cause
Okay.
I'm thinking like, machines do stuff to stuff.
That also means you have clothes.
Well, those are resources now, aren't they?
Right, they
Right.
are indeed.
So I put my clothes and soap.
And
Got some
soap.
soap in there.
Right.
And then the activity is the agitation,
Right.
spin,
Right.
rinse, right?
Or if you're using a rock in a river, then you have to do that as well.
Then I'm okay. The
Yeah,
activity is
or
to
board,
scrub-
washboard.
Yeah, washboard.
I didn't tell you I'm from the
I was
country.
gonna say, I'm old enough to know what
Okay.
it's like to wash a washboard.
Anyway, this is great for nothing,
Output
but go
is
ahead.
how many clothes I washed, how
There
many
you
pounds
go.
of laundry I did.
There you go. There
The
you go.
outcome is that I get to wear these clean clothes
And look fabulous.
and I look fabulous. And the impact is that people like me. People hang out
Right.
with me because I have all
Right.
these snazzy clean clothes.
There you go.
Right.
And that's the logic model for impacting the world. Questions, please.
Yes.
I think we're almost to the end.
Thank you
of
for
like our
Noting that
presentation.
we did laundry.
Thanks, folks. Any questions from you guys at all? Oh, this is the last point.
Yes.
This is the last point. Please, writers, grant writers, before you submit an application, be certain of what you get to name as successful.
I dare say before you sit down to write,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
if you didn't decide to write for the grant until you read the RFP,
Mhm.
I don't know. Okay.
Or-
sometimes you're like, oh no, I already had the idea, but I saw the RFP
Well,
and
you
they
know,
matched.
Realistically, there are people that their bosses will say, here's a grant, fill it out.
A lot of times that's the case.
Yeah.
And I think that's because at that moment, it's because we've all gathered as a community or agency to do a certain thing.
Mhm.
So it's not just a blank question.
Correct.
We're inspired because we're Umoja Behavioral Health,
Correct.
right? You know,
Correct.
but for some of us, sometimes it's like, oh, I see that money or I see that particular task
Mhm.
and I want to do that,
Mhm.
and it just doesn't always work out. So you want to really have a sense that, no, I see there are not enough snowflakes. I'm looking for funding that deals with the problem of not enough snowflakes. But yeah, I was thinking about nothing. And one day I saw the snowflake grant, and I just decided to go ahead and write it. I caution that latter approach. And so, yeah, so John asked, how do we recommend handling a no to an application? So
I
have a very nice
let me take that
tub.
one. Come on, John.
So cute.
And for those of you who need to handle a no question, this isn't the right time, please do it with a smile.
Right,
One thing said, oh,
Gracefully.
which includes, oh,
Gracefully.
great. What are we
Yes.
measuring?
right,
Oh, is everyone together? Is
Right.
this part of our plan?
right.
Where does this fit in? Would
That's
you
right.
rather that I do this first or I work on the other grant that I'm working for the other application?
Well,
Because
and-
I need to know what the priorities are here.
Be wary of a social anxiety of sorts, because not all no's come as clear. So if I get a clear no, it's very educational, mind you. If I get a vague no, sometimes it informs maybe the next time I might approach that funder, because they didn't inform me on how to be a good partner with them. And sometimes that's the problem. So it depends on where that no came from and how that no came about, because I know I've gotten some no's that I didn't trust.
Oh,
I got some no's that it's all kinds of no's.
Yeah.
Some no's that I'm glad I got eventually. too,
Because
so.
I think I was under the assumption, my assumption was that John was talking about when your supervisor puts a grant on your desk
And you want to say
and
no.
you want to say, no, I don't have time to
Yeah.
do that.
Be
You know, I don't have
impeccable
time to
with
do
your
it.
word and be authentic. Yeah, I would say, I think to that question, yeah, but right, we got you. And then
Yeah.
I think but I also think that there is an ethics angle to grant making. And I encourage folks to think of it that way, so that if my employer or someone said, here, I want you to apply for funding that I don't think that we really have the capacity to do, then that's a different kind of conversation. And I mention that because I think it does have an impact when a lot of inappropriate funding applications are put out into the universe. It drags the whole process down because reviewers are going through stuff that they don't need to see and stuff like that. So yeah, I encourage you to also approach your funding ethically and with that vision in mind. Does it really fit what you're doing, or what does it really fit what's going on? So yeah, both no's can be very instructive and lead to some better outcomes later.
Well, and I also want to reiterate to the grant writers, you are going to hear the word no.
But you will.
Grant writers, all of us can produce some really wonderful ideas, credible, measurable ideas, and they're still rejected.
Yeah.
Go on to the next grant.
Good
Soon as
point.
you hit enter, once you hit enter, you have to let it go and start focusing on the next grant.
True that. I've got a question here from S. McIver, I believe. How do you best determine what should be in an appendices versus the body of a grant?
I tend to think of appendices as more specific ways to elaborate a point. Like, if I say there are not enough snowflakes, I put that in my narrative, but then an appendix might contain the snowflake total, table of snowflake totals. So I try not to put tables, lists, and things like that in the narrative. I try to put that in an appendix, because a lot of times I'll get a chance to, I have a page limit on my body, but that limit may not include the appendices. So it gives me a chance to really make a good point, and then all I have to take up in my space is see Appendix A to make a good point. But it's tricky because it depends on the format that they ask you to use, huh?
Yeah, it depends on the grant, because one of the biggest no-nos in a federal grant is referring the reviewer to information outside of that body.
So it's a style thing.
So sometimes it's like I said, that's part of the accessible part of the grant. And in that sense, anytime that you would want to use a notation would be to verify or validate a fact. If you are like using for a bibliography, and that has to be like listed in the grant itself, as opposed to like saying see appendix. Now, if you have the ability to do that, that's great, but it really depends on the funder and the application.
And the format. It really does, yeah, because I think, foundations tend to be a little bit more tolerant.
Much more lenient.
Yeah, they're a lot more tolerant with that kind of stuff. But the public government money, it tends to be a lot more specific. And sometimes it's because the pieces get broken up into the review process.
Government money is from taxpayers.
Right.
So since taxpayers require higher levels of accountability, verification, validation. So sometimes more information has to be detailed in a public grant, government grant, than a foundation grant. And foundation grants also get to respond quickly to a situation. If you recall the Ebola pandemic, in the Ebola pandemic, there were foundations that were responding within 2 to 3 months once it became named. However, it took many governments up to a year to fill that gap. So when you look at how you want to go after funding, you want to say, oh, is this going to be a long-term issue? I better look to see how to get onto the money train, as opposed to can we respond immediately?
Well, and I think the fastest one was 3 weeks with Ebola that they were responding, which could affect your payroll, right? So you want a mix really of I think foundation and government money if you can.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Before we close, here is an acronym that I would like to share with some of the writers, technical writers that are out there. The acronym is MORE, M-O-R-E. And I want to remind all of our writers, we're putting this in the chat. Funders want more. The M stands for mission driven. They want applications that are mission driven, that support the mission, not only of the funder, but it's up to you as a writer to link the mission of your agency to the mission of the funder so that that money stream that we talked about is consistent. That's the M. The O is outcome focused. Outcome focused. Do your applications very clearly say who benefits from the change that you are requesting? The R stands for relevant use of data. Relevant use of data. Do you have any data in your technical application, and did you use it correctly? And then the E is are your ideas easy to understand? Or do you have so many syllables up in there that I have to spend the time with my dictionary to get through?
And I'm just gonna say it. Look, the things that I couldn't get out on the elevator between Philadelphia Center Square and the 32nd floor, usually became unwieldy anyway.
He's talking about an elevator speech, guys.
If I couldn't get it out in the elevator, I would get upstairs and they would give me all the resources to do this thing that I couldn't get out in 30 seconds. And it would end up being as difficult to manage over the long term as it did to explain on the elevator. So I think really being clear with ourselves, like 26 words a sentence. Can I do it in 90 seconds? Can I describe what I'm saying in 90 seconds? Can I describe it to my grandmother and
do
my
I know what success
right.
looks like?
Right, yeah.
Can we name success?
That's right, that's right.
Success.
And I think that a lot of universal ideas are fundable. And when they're fundable, they're translatable. So I can tell my grandmother, I can tell my nephew, we're helping people have better snow. Okay, that's clear. That's not hard to understand. I mean, it might be a complicated methodology, but that goal should be something that people can understand.
Very good. Very good. Well, Trish and Laurel, I think we're coming to an end here. We've tried to share what we can. We would definitely like to invite folks to connect with us.
Yes, definitely.
You can reach us. You can go to our website. You can call us on the phone or leave a message on our email. That is info@umojawellness.com. We also really want to very much thank CDPC for this opportunity, just the opportunity to like really work with you and just like share some information. I hope that you guys are really able to pull some useful material from what we were able to share today.
Yes, yes.
Most definitely. I just want to say thank you. I took away quite a bit from the intended outcome at the end to the conscious intention at the beginning and all the choices in between. That was a wonderful, I saw that, it was like a light bulb went on. I saw, okay, I have to start with my idea. I know what I want. Now, how do I get there? So yeah, that was really, really helpful. And the writer's logic model, wow. Devana had put in the chat box that she thanked you for clarifying the difference between output and outcomes. I love that. That writer's logic model, oh my God, where was that 20 years ago for me? And of course, the acronym MORE, that's beautiful. Thank you. This was awesome for me. I mean, and I'm an old timer from way back, but this was very enlightening and it's just a great new insight for me. So I thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll
I believe
the slides with you guys.
Yeah,
today.
we'll share them with you, and then you can share them with the attendees who want them. And we're glad to work with anyone.
Absolutely.
We use an Afrocentric approach, but we intend that Afrocentric approach to have an impact everywhere, to make better outcomes for all of us. Just as modern psychology now uses Buddhist philosophy, it's not the philosophy, it's how we implement it and how we conduct the activities and who we conduct them with, who our partners are.
Definitely.
That make the impact. And so that's what we're so inspired to do and share. So we look forward to hearing from everybody.
Yes, really thank you. All right. And then, we're already getting questions. So when is part 2? So
we were thinking about that. We have to come up with a part 2 because we did have some stuff that we thought might be a little bit. I thought maybe people can let us know what part 2 looks like for them, because we didn't know if part 2 was more of the literative writing stuff, or if people really wanted to get down with the whole spreadsheet thing and how that works out for us. And maybe there's 2 part 2s, maybe there's one of each.
We'll be sending out a survey monkey, so we'll get that feedback from them specifically as to what they would like to see, and then we'll share it with you for part 2. How about that?
Perfect. Yeah, we would love to. Yeah.
Great. All right. Well, with that, I'm going to end the program. And thank you again. You guys are wonderful. And thanks everybody for attending.
All right.
All right.
Yeah.
Have a great one.
Bye now.
Bye-bye.